Carson once revealed the 8 most beautiful women ever on his show. For 30 years, Johnny Carson invited America into his television home each night, introducing viewers to thousands of celebrities from every corner of entertainment. But behind that familiar desk, Carson wasn't just conducting interviews. He was studying human behavior with an almost scientific precision. Johnny noticed things about people that even they didn't know about themselves. Revealed a longtime Tonight Show producer who worked alongside Carson for over a decade. He could read micro-expressions, catch the smallest details in how someone carried themselves. And when it came to beautiful women, Johnny's observations were particularly thorough in his later years. After retiring from the spotlight, Carson occasionally shared private insights with close friends about the parade of celebrities who had crossed his stage. During one such evening at his Malibu home, after several glasses of high-end scotch had loosened his typically guarded demeanor, Carson surprised his guests by naming what he considered the 8 most extraordinarily beautiful women ever to appear on his show. It wasn't just about conventional beauty, explained someone who was present that night. Johnny talked about presence, that indefinable quality that made the cameras love certain women, that made the studio audience hold their breath, that occasionally made even television's most polished professional momentarily lose his train of thought. Tonight, we're revealing Johnny Carson's personal list of the 8 most beautiful women ever to grace The Tonight Show, not just their stunning physical attributes, but the unique qualities that Carson himself observed about each during their unforgettable appearances on television's most prestigious stage. Let's begin with the woman Carson once described as having the kind of beauty that makes time stop. An actress whose mere entrance into the studio caused the legendary host to momentarily forget his own name. Would you welcome Raquel Welch? Raquel Welch, the woman who owned every room. When Raquel Welch walked onto the Tonight Show stage for the first time in 1970, something extraordinary happened. Johnny Carson, television's most controlled and controlling host, was momentarily speechless. For a man whose career was built on an unshakable professional polish, those few seconds of visible discomfort spoke volumes about the overwhelming impact of Welch's presence. She appeared multiple times and always left the audience breathless. Remember the camera operator who worked many of her appearances. The reaction was physical. You could feel the collective intake of breath when she walked out. I operated camera 2, which was positioned to capture the guest entrance, and my director would always whisper into my headset before she appeared, "Take your time on this one. No one's going to complain." What made Welch's Tonight Show appearances particularly memorable wasn't just her extraordinary physical beauty, though that was undeniable, but the confidence with which she carried herself. Unlike many gorgeous actresses who downplayed their looks with self-deprecating humor or affected modesty, Welch moved with an unapologetic awareness of her effect on others. Carson once said off camera, "She doesn't enter a room, she takes it over," revealed a producer who worked closely with the host, and he meant it as high praise. Johnny had a special appreciation for guests who understood their own power and wielded it deliberately. Raquel knew exactly what she was doing every second she was on camera, her timing, her gestures, even the way she crossed and uncrossed her legs. It was like watching a master class in how to own a television appearance. This mastery extended beyond merely looking stunning to an intuitive understanding of how to create memorable television moments. In an era before media training had been refined to a science, Welch demonstrated an innate grasp of how to make the most of her time on Carson's couch. Her face, her figure, her timing, she had it all. Noted a Tonight Show writer who crafted questions for many of her appearances. Most beautiful guests relied primarily on their looks, but Raquel brought something extra, a sharp wit, interesting stories, and this subtle flirtation with Johnny that made their chemistry jump off the screen. She understood that beauty might get you invited, but it was personality that got you invited back, behind the scenes. Welch's appearances created a particular kind of organized chaos among the Tonight Show staff. The normally professional crew would find increasingly creative reasons to be on set during her segments, leading to what one staff member called the Raquel effect, a mysterious doubling of male employees in Studio One. Whenever her name appeared on the booking sheet, We had guys from accounting suddenly needing to check something with production during her segments. Laughed the camera operator. Engineers who typically stayed in their booths would find urgent equipment issues that needed addressing on set. Even NBC executives who rarely showed up for tapings would materialize and stand in the wings. Johnny noticed it, too. He once quipped during a commercial break, if she signed up for the Army, there'd be no draft dodgers. For Carson himself, Welch represented a particular challenge to his professional composure, known for maintaining a slight emotional distance from even his most dazzling guests. He found himself occasionally struggling to maintain that characteristic detachment. During their interviews, there was one appearance where she wore this red dress with a neckline that defied physics. Remembered the producer. Johnny started a question, lost his train of thought mid-sentence, glanced down at his blue card, then looked back up and said, "I'm sorry, what was I saying?" It got a huge laugh because everyone knew exactly what had happened. Johnny rarely got flustered on air, so when it did happen with Raquel, it happened more than once. It was both funny and humanizing. Despite these occasional moments of distraction, what Carson admired most about Welch was her intelligence and self-awareness. Unlike some beautiful actresses who resented being known primarily for their looks, she had made peace with her image while strategically using it to build a substantial career. Johnny once told me, Raquel understands exactly who she is and what she represents. Shared a talent coordinator who worked closely with Carson. She doesn't fight it or apologize for it or pretend it's not real. That's rare and refreshing, coming from Johnny, who spent his life studying people. That was significant insight. This appreciation for Welch's authenticity was evident in how Carson interviewed her, asking substantive questions about her career choices, her experiences as one of Hollywood's first Latina leading ladies, though rarely acknowledged as such during that era, and her perspectives on an industry that often reduced her to her physical attributes. Their conversations had surprising depth, observed the writer. Johnny didn't just toss her softball questions about her latest project or compliment her appearance. He engaged with her as someone with interesting thoughts and experiences. That respect, combined with the obvious appreciation of her beauty, created interviews that were simultaneously substantive and charged with this wonderful unspoken tension. As we leave behind Welch's American glamour, we turn to European sophistication personified, the Italian screen legend whose mere presence on Carson's stage created what one staff member called a masterclass in sensuality. Without saying a word, A. Hutchner called Sophia living and loving, and it's a great kick to welcome her tonight. Would you welcome Sophia Loren? Sophia Loren, the Italian Venus who flustered America's host. When Sophia Loren made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in 1979, the atmosphere in Studio One transformed. The international film icon brought with her not just extraordinary beauty, but an old-world sophistication and sensuality that seemed to exist in a different dimension. From typical Hollywood glamour, her entrance alone confident, unhurried, Regal announced that this was no ordinary guest. Carson was visibly flustered during their first sit-down, recalled a director who worked that night. Johnny prided himself on treating every guest the same, whether they were an unknown comedian or the biggest star in the world. But with Sophia, something shifted. His body language changed completely. He was leaning forward more, laughing a little too enthusiastically at her comments, touching his tie repeatedly. All these small tells that those of us who knew him well recognized as signs that Johnny Carson, the master of television cool, was genuinely affected by her presence. Unlike American beauties who often projected an approachable cheerfulness, Loren brought a European gravitas and sensual maturity that seemed to catch Carson slightly off guard. Her responses to his questions were thoughtful and occasionally provocative, delivered with an Italian accent that transformed even mundane observations into something that sounded like poetry. You don't interview Sophia Loren, you try to survive her, laughed the Tonight Show writer who prepared for her segments. That wasn't meant as a criticism, quite the opposite. She brought this wonderful intensity to the conversation. Her eyes would lock onto Johnny's when she was speaking, and you could almost see him fighting to maintain his professional demeanor. There was a moment when she was describing a scene from one of her films, and she put her hand on Johnny's arm to emphasize a point. I thought we might need to cut to commercial just to give him a chance to regain his composure. What made Lauren particularly fascinating as a Tonight Show guest was the contrast between her smoldering screen persona and her surprisingly thoughtful, sometimes philosophical conversational style. Where viewers might have expected a sex symbol focused on glamour, they instead encountered a woman with substantive insights on everything, from Italian neo-realist cinema to the challenges of maintaining authenticity in Hollywood. The Italian icon with legendary curves and smoldering confidence, noted a television critic who covered her appearances. But what made her so compelling was that the beauty was just the beginning. Her intelligence, her perspective as a European artist working in the American system, her experiences growing up in war-torn Italy, all of it came through in these surprisingly substantive conversations with Carson. She wasn't just gorgeous, she was fascinating. Behind the scenes, Lauren's appearances created a particular kind of reverent preparation among the Tonight Show staff. Unlike the barely controlled chaos that accompanied some beautiful guests, Lauren inspired what one crew member described as almost religious respect, a hush falling over typically boisterous production teams as they prepared for her arrival. The crew treated her like visiting royalty, remembered a production assistant who worked several of her appearances, not just because of how she looked, but because of what she represented. This international film legend, who had worked with the greatest directors in cinema history. There was none of the usual backstage joking or horseplay when Sophia was booked. Everyone was on their absolute best behavior, determined to show her the respect they felt she deserved. For Carson, Lauren represented a particular type of guest, one whose cultural significance and artistic accomplishments demanded serious engagement, even as her extraordinary beauty created an undeniable undercurrent of attraction. This tension between intellectual respect and physical appreciation resulted in interviews that hummed with a unique energy. Johnny had this wonderful mixture of awe and admiration with her. Observe someone who worked closely with Carson. He was clearly dazzled by her beauty. Who wouldn't be? Well, he also genuinely respected her as an artist who had built a remarkable career on her own terms. That combination made their interviews special. Johnny would ask a thoughtful question about her work with De Sica or Fellini, leaning in with genuine interest for her answer while simultaneously seeming slightly distracted by the totality of her presence. It was charming because it was so authentic. What viewers at home might not have fully appreciated was how Lauren's Tonight Show appearances differed from her encounters with most American interviewers, where many hosts focused primarily on her status as a sex symbol. Carson consistently engaged with her complete identity as an artist, a mother, and a woman who had survived wartime poverty to become an international icon. She responded to that respect by giving Johnny her best self, noted the writer. Their conversations had real substance, even as they were wrapped in this delightful packaging of mutual attraction and admiration. She would talk about serious subjects, her difficult childhood, the challenges of being taken seriously as both beautiful and talented, her navigation between European and American film traditions, but with this wonderful warmth and occasional flirtatiousness that kept the interviews from ever feeling heavy. As we shift from Lauren's sophisticated European allure to our next subject, we encounter a very different kind of beauty, the all-American freshness that literally stopped the show when she first sat across from Carson's desk. Thank you. Yeah. And even when we're not busy, we don't go to New York. I mean, unless we absolutely have to. Now, why? Bo Derek, the perfect 10 who silenced the studio. When Bo Derek made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in late 1979, shortly after the release of 10 had transformed her overnight into America's newest fantasy, something unprecedented happened. The typically vocal studio, when audience fell into complete silence as she walked on stage. This wasn't the usual enthusiastic applause that greeted celebrities. It was a collective moment of stunned appreciation that actually required Carson to wait longer than usual before beginning the interview. Bo became a sensation overnight after 10, noted a talent coordinator who worked during that period. But even those of us who had seen the film weren't prepared for the impact of her in person. There's something different about beauty in 3 dimensions. Occupying the same physical space you're in, the camera actually diminished her rather than enhancing her, which almost never happens with celebrities. Unlike many overnight sensations who arrived with carefully rehearsed anecdotes and practiced charm, Derek brought a disarming natural quality to her Tonight Show appearances. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was the apparent lack of awareness of its effect that Carson later identified as her most compelling attribute. Carson called her a living statue and admitted she threw him off his rhythm. Remembered a producer who worked closely with the host. Johnny said she was one of the few guests who made him forget his next question, not because she was saying anything particularly surprising, but because there was this disconnect between how extraordinary she looked and how ordinary, in the best sense, she seemed as a person. The combination was incredibly disarming, even for someone as experienced as Carson. What made Derek's appearances particularly memorable was the visible effect she had not just on Carson, but on the entire studio. Cameramen would stay fixed on her even during moments when they were supposed to be capturing Carson's reactions. The usually professional NBC pages would find reasons to linger near the stage. Even Doc Severinsen and the band members, who had seen countless beautiful women come and go, would stop their usual between-segment chatter when Derek was speaking. The audience didn't blink the entire segment, recalled a camera operator with a laugh. I'm not even sure they breathed. You could literally hear the air conditioning in the studio during her interviews, because everyone was so quiet and focused. Johnny noticed it, too. During one commercial break, he turned to Ed and said, "I could read the phone book right now, and they'd think it was fascinating." Ed replied, "They haven't taken their eyes off her long enough to notice you're still here, behind the scenes." Derek's appearances were notable for their lack of the usual celebrity requirements. At a time when many beautiful actresses arrived with extensive lighting demands, specific camera angle requirements, and lists of pre-approved topics, Derek seemed almost unaware of the machinery of television promotion. She showed up with no entourage, no special requests, no prepared talking points. The producer continued, "Our pre-interview team was actually a bit thrown off because she didn't seem to have any agenda, beyond answering Johnny's questions honestly. In an industry built on calculation and image management, that kind of authenticity was both refreshing and, frankly, a little disconcerting." Carson, with his extraordinary sensitivity to authentic versus performed personality, immediately recognized and appreciated this quality in Derek. While he maintained his characteristic professional poise during their on-air interactions, backstage he expressed genuine appreciation for her lack of Hollywood artifice. Johnny told his producer after her first appearance, "She has no idea how beautiful she is, and that makes her twice as beautiful," revealed someone who worked closely with Carson. That was high praise from a man who had encountered every variety of beauty and celebrity over decades. He respected that she wasn't using her looks strategically. They were simply a fact of her existence, like having brown eyes or being right-handed. This naturalism extended to how Derek discussed the sudden fame that Tan had brought her, with a mixture of appreciation and slight bewilderment that Carson found particularly appealing. Unlike stars who either falsely modestly downplayed their appeal or strategically leveraged it, Derek seemed genuinely surprised by the reaction to her breakthrough role. There was a moment in one interview where Johnny asked her about suddenly being considered a sex symbol, and her response was so unaffected, remembered the talent coordinator. She said something like, "It's very nice, but it's strange because I still feel exactly the same as before," the way she said it. Without calculation or false humility, Johnny just smiled and said, "The rest of us definitely don't feel the same since we saw the film." The audience roared, but you could tell he genuinely appreciated her groundedness. For Carson, who had built a career on distinguishing between genuine and performed personality, Derek represented something increasingly rare in Hollywood: natural beauty matched with natural behavior. In private conversations, he would contrast her with guests who arrived with carefully constructed personas and practiced anecdotes. Johnny once commented that most beautiful actresses had learned how to be famous, developed a public personality to match their looks, said the producer. He said Bo was different because fame had happened to her so suddenly that she hadn't had time to develop those artifices. He found that incredibly refreshing in an industry where authenticity was increasingly rare. As we move from Derek's fresh-faced American beauty to our next subject, we encounter Hollywood royalty whose legendary status preceded her, creating one of the most anticipated Tonight Show appearances of Carson's career. Well, I'm sure you were very cautious this last time. That is true. I'm Elizabeth Taylor, Hollywood royalty who commanded the stage. The booking of Elizabeth Taylor on The Tonight Show was considered such a significant event that NBC executives, who typically left Carson alone to run his program as he saw fit, actually attended pre-production meetings to discuss how to maximize the appearance. Considered by many the last of the true Hollywood goddesses, Taylor rarely did television interviews, making her 1990 visit to Carson's couch a genuine television event. Her violet eyes, diamonds, and sheer presence overwhelmed the set, recalled a stage manager who worked that night. When Taylor arrived at the studio, there was this palpable shift in the atmosphere. Staff members who had worked with presidents, music legends, and Hollywood's biggest stars were suddenly straightening their clothes and standing a little taller. She brought this remarkable, or a sense that we were in the presence of not just celebrity, but genuine Hollywood history. Unlike most guests who were escorted to the green room by a page or production assistant, Taylor's arrival involved significantly more ceremony. The head producer personally greeted her at the stage door, and Carson himself, who almost never met with guests before their on-air appearances, made an exception to briefly welcome her to the show before the taping began. Johnny later said she was Hollywood royalty and she knew it, shared a producer who witnessed their pre-show interaction. And he didn't mean that as criticism at all. He respected that she understood her place in the cultural firmament and carried herself accordingly. There was no false modesty, no pretending she was just like everyone else. Elizabeth Taylor knew exactly who she was, the last great movie star from the golden age of Hollywood, and she embodied that role with appropriate gravitas. This understanding of her own iconic status was immediately evident when Taylor made her entrance. Unlike younger celebrities who would bound onto the stage with enthusiastic waves, Taylor appeared at a measured pace, acknowledging the standing ovation with a slight nod and smile that somehow managed to be both gracious and imperial at the same time. Other guests walked in. She arrived, observed a cameraman who worked that night. It's hard to explain the difference to someone who wasn't there, but when most celebrities enter, they're seeking the audience's approval. When Taylor entered, she was bestowing her presence upon them. She didn't need their validation. She already knew her value. That confidence, combined with her extraordinary beauty even in her later years, created this electric moment where the entire studio just held its breath. The interview itself became a masterclass in star power, where most guests leaned forward eagerly, trying to establish rapport with Carson and an audience. Taylor remained poised and slightly reserved, creating a dynamic where Carson, television's most powerful interviewer, found himself working to draw her out rather than managing the conversation as he typically did. It was fascinating to watch the power dynamic, noted a Tonight Show writer who observed the appearance. Johnny was used to being the center of gravity in any interview, the person to whom everyone else responded. With Taylor, there was this subtle but unmistakable shift. She became the center of gravity, and Johnny very skillfully adjusted his usual approach to accommodate that reality. He was still the consummate professional interviewer, but you could see him making space for her stardom in a way he rarely did for others. This adjustment wasn't just evident in Carson's interviewing style, but in subtle production changes made specifically for Taylor's appearance. The lighting was adjusted to better capture her famous violet eyes. The camera blocking included more close-ups than were typically used for guests. Even the commercial breaks were slightly reorganized to ensure her segment had maximum uninterrupted time. All signs of the special consideration given to a guest considered American entertainment royalty. The control room actually had a special note on the rundown that day: more tight shots on the eyes. Remembered the director. We never got that kind of specific instruction about how to shoot a guest. But everyone understood that those legendary violet eyes were part of what made her Elizabeth Taylor, and we wanted to be sure viewers at home could appreciate them fully. It wasn't just about capturing a beautiful woman. It was about documenting an iconic feature of Hollywood history. For Carson, Taylor represented a connection to a Hollywood era that had shaped his own understanding of stardom and glamour. In private conversations after her appearance, he expressed particular appreciation for how she had maintained the mystique and dignity of old Hollywood in an era increasingly dominated by more accessible, casual celebrity culture. Johnny told his producer after the show, "You don't see that anymore." That kind of grand stardom revealed someone who was present for the conversation. She doesn't give away everything. She keeps something for herself. That reservation, that sense of mystery was something Carson deeply respected. At a time when most celebrities were becoming increasingly confessional and exposed, this appreciation for Taylor's old-school star quality was evident in how Carson conducted their interview. With a deference and respect he rarely showed even to the most prominent guests. He asked substantive questions about her extensive career, her humanitarian work, and her perspectives on how Hollywood had changed since she began as a child actress, treating her not just as a beautiful woman, but as a living link to cinema history. There was genuine reverence in how Johnny approached the interview, observed the writer, not obsequiousness. Carson was too much of a professional for that, but a clear recognition that he was speaking with someone who represented the last of a particular kind of movie star that had essentially disappeared from American culture. He wanted to capture that for his audience, to give them a glimpse of a Hollywood that barely existed anymore. As we transition from Taylor's timeless glamour to our next subject, we encounter a very different kind of beauty, the sun-kissed California girl, whose dazzling smile launched 1,000 posters and changed television history. I haven't seen you for a while. You look, as they say, smashing. Thank you. You really do. Thank you. Yeah, this must have been quite a challenge. Farrah Fawcett, the sunshine girl with a $1 million smile. In 1976, a poster of Farrah Fawcett in a red swimsuit sold over 12 million copies, becoming the best-selling pinup of all time. When she made her first Tonight Show appearance the same year, shortly after Charlie's Angels had premiered, the studio audience's reaction was so prolonged and enthusiastic that Carson had to actually signal to his director to edit it down for broadcast, a rare instance of applause being too extensive even for television's most popular talk show. Her smile alone caused a frenzy, remembered an NBC Paige, who was working the audience that night. People forget now, but in 1976, Farrah represented this perfect cultural moment when her poster, her show, and her look all converged to create this phenomenon that transcended normal celebrity. When she walked onto Carson's stage, you'd have thought the Beatles had arrived. I had to actually ask audience members to please remain in their seats, because people were standing up to get a better look at her, unlike some beautiful women who projected a reserved sophistication or smoldering sensuality. Fawcett brought an almost incandescent quality to her appearance, as a vibrant energy and approachability that Carson later identified as her most distinguishing characteristic. Among the many stunning women who crossed his stage, she brought sunshine and sex appeal in the same breath, noted a talent coordinator who worked on her bookings, where someone like Elizabeth Taylor or Sophia Loren created this respectful hush. Farrah generated actual joy. People were smiling just looking at her. Johnny noticed it immediately. After her first appearance, he told his producer, "She's like human champagne. The whole room feels more bubbly when she's in it." This effervescent quality extended to Fawcett's interview style. Unlike guests who carefully measured their responses or seemed guarded with personal information, she approached conversations with an enthusiasm and openness that Carson found both refreshing and occasionally challenging to his usual measured pace. Carson once joked, "If she was on every week, I'd forget how to talk," recalled a writer who prepared questions for her segments. He meant it affectionately that her energy was so engaging and sometimes made it difficult for him to maintain his usual interview rhythm. She would get excited about topics and lean forward, those famous blonde waves bouncing, that dazzling smile flashing. And Johnny would sometimes just sit back and let her go, because the audience was so clearly delighted by her enthusiasm. Behind the scenes, Fawcett's appearances created a particular kind of excited anticipation among the Tonight Show staff. While beautiful women regularly appeared on the program, few generated the level of pre-show energy that accompanied her bookings. The day Farrah was scheduled, you'd see male staff members suddenly appearing in much nicer clothes than they usually wore, laughed the talent coordinator. Guys who normally wore casual shirts would show up in suits and ties. There would be a mysterious increase in the number of people who needed to be on the set. During her segments, even Johnny, who was normally very consistent in his attire, seemed to take a little extra care on days when Farrah was booked. What made Fawcett particularly effective as a talk show guest was her willingness to be spontaneous and playful, qualities that aligned perfectly with Carson's own preference for natural, unrehearsed moments. Where many celebrities arrived with carefully planned anecdotes, Fawcett seemed happy to follow Carson's lead into uncharted conversational territory. There was one appearance where Johnny made some joke about her famous hair, and Farrah immediately challenged him to try styling it himself. Remembered a cameraman who worked that night. Without missing a beat, she swiveled in her chair, handed him a brush, and said, "Show me how you do it." The audience went crazy, and Johnny, who almost never engaged in that kind of physical comedy with guests, actually stood up and made a few tentative brushes at her hair, while looking absolutely terrified of messing up those perfect waves. It was completely unplanned and absolutely hilarious. This willingness to be spontaneous extended to Fawcett's comfort, with Carson's occasional flirtatious comments responding with good humor rather than discomfort, creating a playful chemistry that made for particularly engaging television. Johnny would occasionally say something like, "I don't know how your husband lets you out of his sight." And Farrah would come right back with something like, "Well, he knows I'm going to see you, Johnny, so he figures I'm in good hands," recalled the writer. It was this perfect balance. Johnny could acknowledge her extraordinary beauty without it becoming uncomfortable, and she could play along with the flirtation without it seeming demeaning. They had a wonderful television rapport that way. For Carson, who had interviewed countless beautiful actresses over his long career, Fawcett represented a particular type of all-American appeal that he found especially charming. In private conversations, he would contrast her natural sunshine quality with the more manufactured glamour that had become increasingly common in Hollywood. Johnny once remarked to his producer that Farrah was beautiful in a way that seemed like good health, rather than good genes, revealed someone who worked closely with Carson. He meant that she projected this vibrant, active energy, like her beauty was connected to sunshine and swimming pools and tennis courts, rather than lucky genetics or careful image construction. He found that particularly appealing after years of interviewing more studied, controlled celebrities. As we leave behind Fawcett's California sunshine, we turn to a very different kind of beauty, the elegant sophistication of a groundbreaking actress who brought both stunning looks and historic significance to her Tonight Show appearances. Diahann Carroll, elegant pioneer with unmatchable poise. When Diahann Carroll walked onto the Tonight Show stage, she brought with her not just extraordinary beauty, but the quiet gravity of someone who had broken significant barriers in American entertainment. As the first black woman to star in her own network television series in a non-stereotypical role, with Julia in 1968, Carroll represented both glamorous beauty and historic importance, a combination that Carson treated with particular respect and admiration. "Stunning, elegant, and unshakably poised," observed a producer who worked many of her appearances, where most guests showed at least some nervous energy when they first sat down with Johnny. Carroll always appeared completely composed, as though interviewing with the most powerful man in television was simply another Tuesday. That self-possession, combined with her obvious intelligence and articulate responses, created this wonderful presence that was simultaneously warm and slightly regal. Unlike many beautiful actresses who downplayed their intelligence to seem more approachable, Carroll brought a thoughtful sophistication to her Tonight Show conversations. She would discuss not just her current projects, but the broader context of her career as a black woman navigating an entertainment industry that had historically offered very limited opportunities to performers who looked like her. Carson admired her talent and style, saying, "She walks in like she's floating." Remembered a talent coordinator who booked several of her appearances. But what really impressed him was her ability to address significant topics: racism in Hollywood, the responsibility she felt as a pioneering figure, the challenges of maintaining artistic integrity while always remaining thoroughly entertaining and engaging. Johnny once told his producer, "She can make important points without ever seeming like she's lecturing. That's a rare gift." Behind the scenes, Carol's appearances were notable for the universal respect she commanded from the Tonight Show staff. Unlike the barely controlled excitement that accompanied some beautiful guests, Carol inspired what one crew member described as professional admiration of the highest order, a recognition that they were in the presence of someone who represented both extraordinary talent and significant historical importance, beauty with power behind it. Noted a stage manager who worked during her segments. "You could feel it the moment she arrived at the studio. There was none of the typical backstage chatter or joking around when Diane was booked. Everyone from pages to producers treated her with this special deference that went beyond the respect normally shown to celebrities. It wasn't just about how she looked, though she was certainly beautiful. It was about who she was and what she represented." What made Carol particularly effective as a Tonight Show guest was her ability to combine glamorous beauty with substantive conversation, discussing everything from fashion to civil rights with equal comfort and authority. Unlike guests who seemed limited to specific topics, Carol could pivot seamlessly between light entertainment banter and more serious discussions of her experiences as a pioneering figure. There was a remarkable moment during one appearance when Johnny asked about a recent role, and Carol gently but firmly redirected the conversation to address the limited opportunities still available to black actresses. Recalled a writer who worked on the show. "She did it with such grace that it didn't create any awkwardness." Johnny immediately engaged with the new topic, but it demonstrated her quiet determination to use her platform thoughtfully. Most guests would never have redirected Carson that way, and if they had tried, it might have created tension. When Carol did it, it felt completely natural. This ability to address significant issues while maintaining perfect poise particularly impressed Carson, who respected guests who could bring substance to their appearances without sacrificing entertainment value. In private conversations, he would express admiration for how Carol navigated her dual identity as both a glamorous celebrity and an important cultural figure. Johnny once commented to his producer after her appearance, "She never makes you choose between taking her seriously and enjoying her company." Revealed someone close to Carson. That was high praise from him and acknowledgement that Carol had mastered the difficult balance of being both substantive and entertaining, politically significant and personally charming. Many guests could manage one or the other, but rarely both simultaneously. Carol's fashion choices for her Tonight Show appearances became legendary among the staff, her sophisticated style providing a visual representation of the elegance she brought to every aspect of her public presentation. Unlike trend-focused younger actresses, she cultivated a timeless elegance that Carson particularly appreciated. She never appeared in anything less than perfect taste, remembered the talent coordinator. When other stars were chasing whatever fashion trend was hot that season, Diane would arrive in these impeccably tailored, classic outfits that somehow looked both current and timeless. Johnny, who had very traditional taste himself, really appreciated that. He once said, "She dresses like someone who respects both herself and her audience." Coming from Carson, with his old-school sensibilities, that was significant praise. For Carson, Carol represented a particular kind of mature, sophisticated beauty that he found increasingly rare in an industry often fixated on youth. In private conversations, he would contrast her cultivated elegance with the more transient appeal of much younger actresses who appeared on his show. Johnny told his producer once, "Diane understands that true style outlasts fashion." Shared the producer. He meant it as a commentary on both her physical presentation and her broader approach to her career. She had built something sustainable and substantive rather than chasing quick fame or momentary trends. That permanence, that sense of having created something lasting, earned his deepest respect. As we shift from Carol's elegant sophistication to our next subject, we encounter the European beauty who created one of the most iconic moments in cinema history, emerging from the ocean in a scene that would define the modern action film. Isn't that disgusting behavior? Yeah. Did you hear that one guy yells out, "I love you," and he doesn't even know you? No. Yeah. Ursula Andress, the original Bond girl who stopped the show. When Ursula Andress made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in the 1960s, shortly after her breakthrough role as the first Bond girl in Dr. No, the Swiss actress brought with her the unique status of having created one of cinema's most iconic moments, emerging from the Caribbean Sea in a white bikini, a scene that instantly entered the pantheon of film history and established a template for action film glamour that persists to this day. The original Bond girl, and it showed, remembered an NBC executive who was present for her first appearance. There was something almost mythological about her beauty, this perfect combination of European sophistication and primal sensuality. When she walked onto Carson's stage, there was this collective intake of breath from the audience. It wasn't just appreciation, it was something closer to awe. Unlike American actresses who often projected an approachable girl-next-door quality, Andress brought a distinctly European sensibility to her Tonight Show appearances, direct, unapologetically sensual, and refreshingly forthright in her responses to Carson's questions. Where American beauties might have deflected compliments with self-deprecating humor, Andress accepted admiration with a comfortable confidence that Carson found both surprising and refreshing. Her appearance caused Johnny to visibly lose his place in the monologue, recalled a cameraman who worked one of her earliest appearances. He was introducing the night's guests, and when he got to her name, he actually stopped mid-sentence, looked directly at her sitting in the green room monitor, and completely lost his train of thought. For Carson, the most professional, prepared host in the business, to have that kind of visible reaction was almost unprecedented. He recovered quickly, but that brief moment of being genuinely flustered spoke volumes about her. In fact, what made Andress particularly effective as a Tonight Show guest was the contrast between her goddess-like physical appearance and her surprisingly direct, unpretentious conversational style. Unlike many beautiful actresses who seemed carefully scripted, Andress brought a European frankness to discussions of everything, from her career to her personal life, that Carson found both challenging and engaging. He wasn't hosting. He was hypnotized, observed a writer who prepared questions for her segments. What made Ursula different from many gorgeous women was that she didn't seem to be performing beauty. She simply embodied it without apparent effort or calculation. Combined with her Swiss-German directness, she would answer questions with a frankness that sometimes startled Carson. It created these wonderfully authentic exchanges that felt more like eavesdropping on a fascinating conversation than watching a typical talk show interview. Behind the scenes, Andress's appearances created a particular kind of focused energy among the Tonight Show staff. Unlike the excitement that accompanied some beautiful guests, with Andress there was what one crew member described as a reverent quality, a recognition that they were in the presence of someone who had created a genuine cultural landmark. The crew treated her with this interesting mixture of professional respect and barely concealed awe. Remembered a production assistant who worked during her segments. There was very little of the typical backstage joking or casual atmosphere when Ursula was booked. Everyone was on their absolute best behavior, almost like visiting royalty had arrived. It wasn't just about her beauty, though that was certainly extraordinary. It was about her status as someone who had created this iconic cinematic moment that everyone recognized. This recognition of her cultural significance extended to how Carson approached their interviews. While never ignoring her obvious beauty, he also engaged with her seriously as someone who had made a significant impact on cinema history, discussing how the famous beach scene had changed both her life and the action film genre itself. Johnny had a remarkable ability to simultaneously acknowledge a beautiful woman's appearance while also treating her with genuine respect for her professional accomplishments, noted someone who worked closely with Carson. With Ursula, he found this perfect balance, appreciating her extraordinary looks without reducing her to just those looks. He would ask substantive questions about her career choices, her experiences working with different directors, her perspective on how the Bond films had evolved since her groundbreaking role. What particularly impressed Carson about Andres was her lack of false modesty about her impact. Unlike many actresses who downplayed their significance or seemed uncomfortable discussing their status as sex symbols, Andres spoke matter-of-factly about her famous scene and its cultural resonance. There was an appearance where Johnny asked about the white bikini scene, and her response was wonderfully straightforward, recalled the writer. She said something like, "Of course it changed everything. One does not create a moment like that, expect life to remain the same. No false humility, no pretending it wasn't important, just this refreshing acknowledgement of reality." Johnny later told his producer he found that kind of honesty tremendously appealing in an industry built on pretense. For Carson, who had built a career on distinguishing between authentic and performed personality, Andres represented something increasingly rare in Hollywood: natural confidence without arrogance, beauty without apology, and European directness without calculation. In private conversations, he would contrast her approach with the more manufactured personas that were becoming increasingly common among American celebrities. Johnny once remarked to his producer that Ursula didn't seem to need America's approval. Revealed the executive, he meant it as high praise that she brought this European self-assurance that didn't require constant validation or reassurance. She knew who she was, knew her place in film history, and carried herself with a confidence that wasn't dependent on audience reaction or critical approval. Carson found that kind of self-contained certainty both unusual and impressive. As we conclude our exploration of Carson's most beautiful guests, we turn to the woman who, though never appearing on his show, occupied a unique place in his gallery of iconic beauties, a star whose absence became its own kind of presence. Aren't you ashamed of those suspicions you had about me? Terribly. Cut it. Good. Thank you. Marilyn Monroe, the beautiful ghost of The Tonight Show, perhaps the most intriguing name on Carson's list of the most beautiful women ever to appear on a Tonight Show, was the one who never actually sat on his couch. Marilyn Monroe. Although she died in 1962, just months before Carson took over as permanent host, Monroe's specter loomed large over the program throughout his tenure, with Carson occasionally referencing her as the ultimate guest who got away. Though she never appeared in person, Carson referred to her often, explained a longtime producer who worked with Carson through most of his 30-year run. It became almost a running theme over the decades. Johnny would interview a beautiful actress or sex symbol, and occasionally make some reference to Monroe as the benchmark against which all Hollywood glamour was measured. There was this sense that she represented something quintessential about American beauty and celebrity that later stars could approach, but never quite capture. This fascination with Monroe wasn't merely professional interest in a significant cultural figure. It reflected Carson's genuine regret at having missed the opportunity to interview someone he considered a uniquely compelling personality. In private conversations, he would occasionally speculate about how a Monroe interview might have unfolded had timing allowed their careers to intersect. Johnny once called her the most beautiful woman who never sat in that chair, recalled someone who knew Carson well. Johnny had this theory about Monroe that beneath the manufactured sex goddess persona was an intelligent, wounded soul with genuine artistic aspiration. He believed she would have been a fascinating interview subject precisely because of that tension between her public image and her private reality. It was the kind of complex personality that brought out Carson's best interviewing skills. What made Carson's interest in Monroe particularly notable was how it evolved over the decades of his tenure. In the 1960s and early 70s, his occasional references to her focused primarily on her status as the ultimate sex symbol. By the 1980s and 90s, as more nuanced understandings of Monroe's life and struggles became part of the cultural conversation, Carson's comments reflected a more sophisticated appreciation of her complicated legacy. She haunted the stage without ever stepping on it, observed a writer who worked with Carson during his later years. By the time I joined the show in the 1980s, Johnny's references to Monroe had shifted from simply acknowledging her as the quintessential blonde bombshell to more thoughtful comments about how the entertainment industry had both created and ultimately failed her. It was as though, as he himself aged and gained perspective on the machinery of celebrity, he developed a more empathetic understanding of what Monroe had experienced. This evolution mirrored broader cultural reassessments of Monroe's significance from sex symbol to tragic figure to feminist icon and demonstrated Carson's own intellectual engagement with changing perspectives on entertainment history. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who remained fixed in their initial impressions of cultural figures, Carson showed a remarkable willingness to incorporate new information and evolving interpretations into his understanding of Monroe's legacy. Johnny once had a conversation with a film historian who was a guest on the show, and during a commercial break, the topic of Monroe came up. Remember the producer? The historian mentioned some recently published information about Monroe's intellectual interests, her poetry, her attempts at serious dramatic training with Lee Strasberg, her library of classic literature. Johnny was genuinely fascinated and later told his producer, "We all missed who she really was. We saw what we wanted to see." It was a remarkably reflective comment from someone who had been in the entertainment industry as long as Carson had. This growing appreciation for Monroe's complexity occasionally surfaced in Carson's interviews with actresses who had portrayed her or who were frequently compared to her, rather than focusing exclusively on the physical resemblance or sex appeal that had made such comparisons common. Carson would often ask more substantive questions about how these actresses understood Monroe's psychological reality or the pressure she faced as an icon of beauty and sexuality. There was a fascinating moment when he interviewed an actress who had recently played Monroe in a television movie. Recalled the writer, instead of the expected questions about how she captured Monroe's famous breathy voice or recreated iconic looks from her films, Johnny asked about how she had approached Monroe's underlying vulnerability and intelligence. It reflected this more nuanced understanding he had developed over the years, this recognition that Monroe's beauty, while extraordinary, was just one element of a much more complex and ultimately tragic human story. For Carson, Monroe ultimately represented the perfect intersection of extraordinary beauty and compelling psychological complexity, the ideal talk show guest who combined visual appeal with substantive conversational possibilities. Her absence from his show remained, in his mind, one of the great missed opportunities of his long career. In his final years on the show, Johnny occasionally engaged in these what-if conversations with his producers, revealed someone close to Carson who would have been his dream guest that he never got to interview. Monroe always topped the list. He believed she would have been not just visually stunning, but genuinely interesting, someone who had lived at the very center of American celebrity culture and paid a tremendous personal price for that position. As an interviewer who always sought the person behind the persona, Carson saw in Monroe the ultimate challenge, the woman whose public image had so completely overwhelmed her private reality that even she herself struggled to maintain the distinction